Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jonathan Brent, Executive Director and CEO of the YIVO Institute for Jewish Research, and it's a great pleasure to welcome Leo Melamed and Terry Savage to this program that will be discussing Leo's new book, The Man of the Futures, that is available on Amazon and at local bookstores. But it's also a great pleasure to know that people have tuned in from Cape Town to California for this program, and it's a special treat to have so many people from such a diverse geographical area listening to us today. I'd like to say a couple of words about Leo and then about Terry before the program begins. Leo Melamed is a Holocaust survivor, the author of Man of the Futures, which we will be discussing today, in which he recounts his escape from the Nazis. It's an odyssey that took 2 years and spanned 3 continents, 6 languages, the Trans-Siberian Railroad in Japan, courtesy of a life-saving transit visa from Japanese Counsel General to Lithuania, Chiune Sugihara. In 1972, as chairman of the Chicago Mercantile Exchange, Leo Melamed revolutionized markets with the creation of the International Monetary Market, the first futures exchange for financial instruments, and the launch of currency futures. In 1987, he revolutionized futures trading with the founding of Globex, the world's first futures electronic trading system. 20 years after their inception, Nobel Laureate Merton Miller named financial futures the most significant innovation of the past 2 decades. Man of the Futures is of significance beyond his revolutionary innovations in financial markets. Leo Melamed brought with him a love of Mamalosh, the Yiddish language. Consequently, his memoirs contain a rare and intimate glimpse of the Jewish world destroyed by the Nazis. But I would like to say one or two more things about Leo, which is that he is on the board of the YIVO Institute for Jewish Research that was established in 1940 in New York City, having been destroyed in its place of birth in Vilnius, Lithuania, or then Vilna, Poland. And what Leo has brought to the YIVO Institute, and what I hope our conversation will eventually disclose, is that link between those roots in Eastern Europe and the extraordinary success that he has had and the impact that he has made in the financial worlds of the present day. It's a leap that many coming from that world of Eastern Europe made, but none quite as visibly, as spectacularly as Leo. Terry Savage is going to be interviewing Leo. Terry, as I'm sure many of you know, is a nationally recognized expert contributor on personal finance, the economy, and the markets. She writes a weekly personal finance column syndicated in major newspapers by Tribune Content Agency. Terry appears frequently on national television and radio programs commenting on the financial markets. She is featured on WGN radio and WGN TV in Chicago with a weekly personal finance segment. Terry is the author of 4 best-selling books on personal finance. And as I found out in conversation this morning, it's a particularly sweet pleasure to know that it was my father's bookstore in Chicago that gave Terry her first book party many years ago. The first edition of her best-selling book, The Savage Truth on Money, was named one of the top 10 money books of the year by Amazon.com. And so, with no further ado, Terry.
Thank you, Jonathan. I'm delighted, actually honored to be here between the 2 literary giants. You are all in for a little bit of a treat, because when you get Leo started talking about his history and his genius in the financial markets, you're hearing from a Renaissance man. And it's not what a Renaissance man or woman, maybe there will be, is a person who, not just in one area, but in multiple areas, is such a futuristic thinker, a connector. Leo has written many books. He's even written some great science fiction books. As a matter of fact, we didn't talk about that in your intro, and wonderful books about the market. I should disclose, in the interest as a journalist of full disclosure, that Leo and I go back a long, long way. I was a young and terrible trader on the floor of the aforementioned monetary market at the Mercantile Exchange. Actually, I was the first woman trader and first founding member of the Chicago Board Options Exchange. I thought I should trade money because I was so interested in it. Leo encouraged me to be on a little local television station explaining some of these things. He said, "That's your gift, Terry, not trading." See, he is a genius. And NBC in Chicago said, "Yes, we're going to put her on the air." And then someone higher up said, "Wait a minute, who's this girl?" It was 40 years ago. "Who's this girl we're going to put on the air? How do we know she knows anything?" They called me, "Give us some references." I gave them only one. It was Leo Melamed. And that started my entire career in television and journalism and so forth. So Leo, as you well know, I'm always indebted to you. Where to start? Let's start at the start. Let's do a little bit of history, especially for YIVO, because the history starts where YIVO picks up in Eastern Europe. Bialystok. Leo?
Well, as you indicated, I was a child, 7 years old, when war broke out and the Germans captured Bialystok. And we were doomed to be annihilated like 6 million others did. But the brilliance of my father and mother changed the whole lifespan since we escaped. We ran a journey we didn't know where we were going, but it ended up being a journey that, as Terry indicated, several continents. We went from Vilna in Europe to Japan, courtesy the Sugihara visa, and then to the United States. In doing that, we had to cross all of Siberia and the Trans-Siberian Railroad. And it was a difficult journey. But my parents were probably among the brightest and most intellectuals that the world knew, the world had in Poland at that time. My father was a member of the Yiddish socialist organization, the Bund. His only son became a capitalist as a consequence. But at any rate, that escape saved our lives. And it was the result of many, many people, but mostly because of Chiune Sugihara, the Japanese Counsel General in Lithuania, who issued over 2,000 visas, which represented over 6,000 people who escaped. Most of them were Jews, and escaped to Japan. And from Japan all over the world, we ended up in the United States. And my parents got jobs in Chicago as Yiddish school teachers. And there I was.
Wait, you went too fast. I've heard some of your stories about that train, first of all, about getting out. Just how did your dad know to go instead of stay?
Yeah, well, that's the brilliance of my father, who did not trust, even when the Russians took over from the Germans, he did not trust either of them. And it ended up, when I asked him as an adult, what made you do it? You gave up your home, you gave up your profession and all your relatives and all your friends, and you didn't know where you were going, and it was with literally very little money. He was a teacher. What made you do it? And he said, you know, it was an instinct, something you are certain is the right thing to do. And I just followed that instinct. That's what he told me, and I believe it.
Now, I want you to tell the story, even though this audience, I'm fascinated by this, everyone, so indulge me. You understand that Leo became, and you'll hear more about it, involved in the futures markets. He created a whole market about what's the future value of money. When all currencies were pegged in relation to each other, it didn't matter. We'll go into that history in a while. But Leo has often told the story, and I love it the most, of how he got his first introduction to the fact that currency values are not always the same. Will you tell that story?
Well, you know the story very well. When my father and mother, as I said, were teachers, and wherever they could, they were teaching me, since I wasn't really getting an education formally during the course of 2 years. So one day in Vilna, he took out a coin and asked me if I recognized what it was. And I said, sure, that's a zloty, which is the currency of Poland. And then he took out a different coin that I didn't recognize and said I didn't know what that was. And he asked me, what are they worth? And I guessed they were worth the same. One was the currency of Lithuania, the other was the currency of Poland. Litas was the Lithuanian currency. He said, well, that's what the government tells us, but let's go and find out. And he took me by hand, and remember, I'm 7 years old, and he went to a bakery, and he asked the baker, how much is a loaf of bread? This is Lithuania. And the baker said, 1 litas. And my father said, fine, we'll take it. And he wrapped it up and handed my father the loaf of bread. My father gave him a zloty. Oh my God, the baker backed up and he says, no, 2 zlotys, 1 litas, 2 zlotys. Boy, is that a lesson I never forgot. So my father explained that the real marketplace is the people in the marketplace. That's the only place where you can really find out value. And that was a proof of what he was telling me.
A lesson that carried forward. What do you remember about the Jewish culture before you left? Do you have any memories of that? You spoke Yiddish at home?
Well, of course, my first language was Yiddish and my second was Polish. And my parents were, of course, teachers in the Yiddish school that was accredited by the Polish government, so that if you graduated the Yiddish school, you could go to gymnasium. That was a big step that they had accomplished. And their lives was totally consumed by Yiddish culture and organizations and literature and so forth. And they, when we escaped to Vilna, which was our first stopping point, they pointed out that the YIVO, which they were very active members for, was born in the 1920s in Vilna. And then what he didn't know is that a year later, in 1940, the Vilna YIVO sort of escaped to New York. And from then on, it was in New York. So that was a very fortunate move by the organization itself. And subsequently, when we arrived in the United States in 1941, my parents became active again in the YIVO. And I, of course, inherited that trait and continue to be active with the YIVO.
Was the YIVO part of almost every Jew's life in those days? I mean, how did it, now we think of it as a very involved in lives, but still more of a museum, of a historical kind of a thing. But when it was happening real time in those years, what do you remember about it?
Well, only to the extent, I mean, remember, I'm 7 years old,
Yeah.
Terry, and only to the extent that I recognized the love and importance YIVO played in my parents' life. And, the memory of the fact that both Einstein and Sigmund Freud supported the idea of the creation of the YIVO. So of course, it's things you never forget and you hold very holy. So that when I arrived in the US, it was natural for my parents to pick up that obligation and responsibility.
Now, I still don't want to skip over that long Siberian train ride. How long did that take? What were you, a little kid, doing on this train with your parents?
Well, it was a very dangerous ride, with my mother thinking that any given moment somebody from the KGB would arrest us because my father was a member of a very strong anti-communist organization, the Yiddish Bund, and it was a socialist organization. But the KGB had him on their list as an enemy of the state. And so not only were we running from the Nazis to start with that had captured us, but also running from the KGB. It's really an unbelievably miracle that we escaped, but we did. And over 2 weeks on the train, my mother and father were always afraid that at any given point, they would be found out of who they really were and would be arrested and sent to Siberia. It was always a joke my father made that one way or another, we're going to Siberia, whether it's by train to Japan or Vladivostok or in other ways.
Okay, so you got, you got from Vladivostok to Japan.
Well, it was, as I said, Moscow was just 3 days waiting for it was a one-track affair and waiting for the train to come in and then taking us all the way across all of Siberia with many, many stops along the way where my father would go out and buy foodstuffs. And my mother always felt that he will not return, but he always did. And we ended up in Vladivostok and then eventually a truly junk boat across the little ocean to Japan. And we were received extremely well by the Japanese people. We had the visa. We knew we couldn't stay there for long, but people who have seen Casablanca know exactly what a transit visa means. It means it's a life-saving instrument. Eventually, it allowed us to enter the United States.
And make that leap for us. How did you wind up in Chicago, not New York or not on the West Coast even?
Well, my parents got a job at the Shalom Aleichem Folks Institute in Chicago, teaching children the language and history of Jewish and Yiddish. This was a parochial school, of course, after school, like a Sunday school, but this was every day. And they got those jobs because they were well-known teachers. And of course, I went with them and grew up in Chicago, in the melting pot of the division in Kedzie, where, Polish people, Jews and Italians, and mostly them mingled together and grew up.
And of course, education was important, but you were destined to be a lawyer. You became a lawyer.
I did, and actually I was a very successful lawyer. We were able to buy a home and so forth. But my first love was already the Chicago Mercantile Exchange because I had gotten a job as a runner there by accident. I thought I was getting a job with a law firm called Merrill Lynch, Pierce, Fenner, and Smith. And with a name like that, I was sure that this was a law firm. Well, it wasn't, of course. It was the floor of the Merc. But the minute I saw it, and the minute I was there with the running and the shouting, I knew that this was my first love from then on. And even though I was a successful attorney, I wanted to be a trader at the Merc, and eventually borrowed from my father most of his life savings, $3,000, to buy a membership at the Merc. That's what it cost then.
Let me intrude with a little background. So in Chicago in those days, and then actually until maybe only 12, 15 years ago, when the Chicago Mercantile Exchange bought the Board of Trade, it was a merger, but the Mercantile Exchange, under Leo's guidance, purchased the Board of Trade. There were two exchanges. The Board of Trade traded grains, soybeans, corn, wheat, and things like that. And it was all the Irish guys. I know, because I was around back then. And the Mercantile Exchange traded butter and eggs, pretty much, and cattle and trafe, pork bellies. And it was all the Jewish guys. What was the Merc like when you first got there? And tell me how fast it happened that you made your mark on the exchange.
Well, actually, the Chicago Merc didn't have a good name because it was like the Wild West. The rules were made to convenience those that are in charge. And it really was a backwater institution. It called itself a futures market, but it was not anywhere near what the Board of Trade actually was. And I recognized that. And being a lawyer and being elected as chairman eventually in 1969, I knew I had to transform it with rules and make it into a real institution, which I did for the next decade or so. And along the way, of course, I knew that the exchange couldn't exist with just butter and eggs. It had to go to other places that were more important. And the idea of currency futures came to me because the currency system in the world was known as Bretton Woods, where it was fixed exchange rates. And in the late 1960s and early 70s, the Bretton Woods system was under attack and was not going to last. You couldn't live with fixed exchange rates in a world that information flowed by the minute. And so I thought, well, why not futures in currency? And of course, no one thought that I had a good idea. The board of directors certainly didn't. I wasn't even an economist. And here I was a young lawyer telling them what to trade. Then, but I was really fervent about the idea, passionate, because I thought this was a great idea and that it would work. But I couldn't convince the board to allow me to do that. So I went to what was the real maven in the world, Milton Friedman, who was a professor at the University of Chicago. I went to him and I said, listen, Professor Friedman, I have this idea of a currency futures market. What do you think? Well, by God, he said, oh, what a wonderful idea. You must do that. I couldn't believe my ears. You know, here was the great economist, Milton Friedman, telling me that it's a good idea. I asked him to put it in writing because no one would believe me. And so he did. He wrote a feasibility study. And with that study, I was able to prove to my board and then to the world that the idea of financing futures was a good idea. That's summing up probably 20 years or so of my work at the Merc.
So for the Yiddish scholars out there, you know, if you think back, not just in recent years, but 20, 30 years ago, if you're importing whatever it is, whether you're importing cars or steel from Germany, or you're exporting grain or soybeans to another country, or bringing them in from South America, or oil around the world, almost everything is traded in dollars. But you don't know what the value before there was a euro, you know, of the Deutschmark would be, or the British pound, or any other currency, the Japanese yen. And so the idea was that you would hedge your risk by locking in a future price. And that took the risk out of your export trade or your import trade. I mean, Leo, that affected everything, the IMM, International Monetary Market.
Yes, you're exactly right. The the idea I had was that the hedging mechanism that worked for futures in grain and in agriculture could equally work, or maybe even better work, in finance, and that it would provide the ability of insurance to hedge risk for the financial world. And of course, in finance, it wasn't just currency, it was interest rates and stock index markets and all of the above and on, that all benefited from the idea of having futures as an insurance contract when they needed to limit the risks that they wanted to do in business. And so that it spread like wildfire. The idea, Merton Miller, the great Nobel Laureate in economics, called it the best idea invention in the last 20 years when he made that statement. And today, of course, as you indicated, futures markets cover the gamut from everything, including agriculture, of course, but it's mostly financial, about 80% financial. It clearly was the right idea at the right time.
So, as they say in our world, Dayenu. It would have been enough if you just not only invented the financial futures markets. So instead of just Kellogg's telling the farmers, I'll pay you this in November or December for your corn or September after it's harvested, because we know we're going to need to make cornflakes. They took that risk of the crop out of there, and the farmers said, oh, great, we'll deliver it. That was the futures in agriculture. You transferred that to all things financial, not just currencies, right, but interest rates. And Diana, that would have been enough, except that long before what's going on today. What year was that? 1970?
Well, if you're speaking about
Globex.
Yeah,
I was there as a reporter on the trading floor. So then that was when I was working for the news. So it was early 80s. Leo decided, now you have to understand what an anathema this was. Remember the futures pits, all those brightly colored jackets, arms waving, sold you 100, sold. We loved it on TV. Leo said, let's move it to the screen. Everybody said, what? No way. That's terrible. Leo said, okay, I will just do it at night. Tell the story of Globex.
You're speaking of what took me the next maybe 15 years to prove to the world that the idea of electrification of the transaction system is the right idea. This came to me in 1986 when I saw the growth of computers, and I realized that you must be able to create an instrument that will carry the trade from the origin of its desk to the pit in Chicago or elsewhere electronically. It would be much faster, much cheaper, much more accurate, and therefore it certainly had to work. There was one problem with it. No one believed me, and the brokers were totally opposed to it because it sounded like something that was going to take away their jobs. And when I said, yeah, but it's going to create more jobs for you than you have now. And of course, I couldn't prove it. So it was a very, very difficult idea, very difficult. Of course, today, Globex is the instrument of choice throughout the futures world. It is the same instrument is now used all over all markets, whether they be in securities or futures or options. Electronics is what captured it and what made it so big. Today, the CME Group is one of the largest institutions in the world, and it couldn't have gotten there without electrification. It was impossible. And so, yeah, in the beginning, it took the jobs of the brokers, but they learned to other jobs that emanated from that, and it worked for them, and the industry continued to grow.
Yeah, for sure. Several $1 trillion a day of nominal value trades on the CME's Globex engine. And Leo, just thinking of you, we honored you last week when the CME announced it, that instead of being traded on this matching engine, now the trades will move, we will move the engine to the cloud. You were ahead of every, both the conceptual things and the technology things. So let me take you back, because this is all for YIVO, and I want to get back to the other side of your life. But I also wanted everybody to realize what a great innovator you are, and always have been. So what is it, do you think, in the millennia of Jewish culture that allowed you to see the world, to see the future of the world? I mean, the book is called Man of the Futures. With futures, it's a double entendre. Futures are stock futures, interest rate futures. But you also saw the future. You were ahead. You saw where the world was going. What is it? Is that a gene you think you have? Is that, to what do you attribute that?
You know, it's hard to answer the question. One doesn't know how these things work. But in my case, I was writing a science fiction book. And in that book, I created, this is a people that was intelligent beings somewhere in the galaxies. And they had a computer that ran their world. And that computer could do billions of things at the same time and cover all the territory. And standing there one day watching the pit with the runners going from the desk to the pit and back again and throwing orders on the floor, I said to myself, you know, my imagination just created a computer that could do billions of things. You think there isn't enough technology to create one little computer that could just transmit the orders from the telephone to the transaction place? And of course it could. And I went to Reuters, who was then the largest communication company, and asked them if they would consider building such an instrument, such a technological instrument. They, of course, said yes, but it took them 5 years to do. And by then, the idea had spread like wildfire all over, except that I still had difficulty proving to the members that it would work. And it wasn't until about 2005, when we finally went public, that the world grabbed onto this idea. And of course, the markets couldn't exist without it.
Yeah, and now the trading floors are essentially gone, but the markets are huge and efficient, and they trade around the clock. Look, I want to switch back. I just switch gears here because of our audience and their interest. Your story is a fascinating story, but a lot of Eastern European Jewish immigrants that made it to the United States left all that behind. Yiddish was not spoken. I think people know that Yiddish was just not a language that was spoken. You were going to be American and your kids were going to be American. You maintained your interest, I mean, starting in the theater and literature. Give us that wide swath. We spent so much time on the markets. Why didn't Yiddish just disappear when you got here and now you were American?
Well, actually, you know, there are many people who will tell you that Yiddish will never disappear. It was the language of the Jewish people throughout the world, and in many respects is still there, is being activated in colleges and universities throughout. But my connection was quite obvious. On my passing of my father, in 1990, a gentleman came to pay his respects. His name was Mead, Benjamin Mead, whose wife was Vladka. Vladka was known to have been this heroic Joan of Arc in the ghetto that transcended both inside and outside, saving people, bringing ammunition to the uprisings in the ghetto. And she was very famous. And Ben said to me, how do you plan on maintaining the memory of your father that was so important in Jewish life? And he suggested that I join the efforts to build the United States Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. And of course, I did. And we built what is probably the greatest museum of history about the Holocaust, all due to Sarah Bloomfield, the director, and Jill Weinberg in Chicago. And I became an active member of that foundation and suggested the launching of a committee on conscience, actually, which is one of the pillars of the exchange, of the museum. Now, I am, of course, equally active at the YIVO. So those two organizations stand out in my mind. One, memorializing the Holocaust and the horror of the Holocaust in real form with evidence and all. And the other, preserving the history of the Jews of 1,000 years of Yiddish life. Both institutions are hugely close to me. Of course, there are many others, but I would say that to me, the two institutions I've just named are the most important for me to be active in, and I continue to do that.
And do you ever see, tell me about your artistic side. Oh, tell me about the theater. I know that about you. You would never talk about that. The Yiddish theater, I mean. Well, by the way, not only that, he's like a master's in bridge. That's another whole, we won't go there, but tell me about the Yiddish theater.
Well, actually, when we arrived, I was like a prodigy because I could speak Yiddish in pure form, having grown up in the language. And pretty soon, I was called upon to recite poetry at events and to recite them in Yiddish. And I, of course, did. And word got out that here was Leo Melamed, the Yiddish prodigy. And pretty soon, Dina Halpern, who was a great actress and created a theater organization in Chicago with her husband, Danny Newman, who ran the Lyric Opera, and invited me onto the stage, which I, of course, accepted. And I thought this was a great thing, and I was going to become the next, well, who knows what. But I did play in a lot of Yiddish, in Yiddish, many of the great stories and theater programs, and became actually known as an actor. Of course, I was going to be a lawyer, and then later I was going to be a trader. But I never gave up the idea of maintaining myself in the Jewish world, even though it didn't lead to a profession. But Dina Halpern and Molly Pecan and people like that infused me with the love for Yiddish theater, and I did my best.
Leo, can I throw you a curve right now? And we are, by the way, going to answer your questions. So this is a good time to put them in the question box there. It says Q&A, and we will go through them. I want to ask you a question. I mentioned to you before that I wanted to talk about these various topics. But if we were having lunch, I'd ask you this. Are you worried today when you see what's going on in America? And I recognize many of you are from around the world, but you see it too, about another rise of anti-Semitism?
Of course, I worry. And of course, it's something that is of great concern to everyone who is not a racist and loves liberty, Jews included in that. And of course, anti-Semitism is as old as life itself. Unfortunately, it continues to rise from time to time. And Jews today have to be very, very alert to that. They are in Israel as well as in the United States, and we must try and do everything we can to stop and expose what it is. it's a plague that, like COVID, infects the world from time to time in history, and we must always be alert. But sure, I, like many Jews today, worry about that and support the efforts that we are undertaking to try and stop its spread and to teach what it represents. Yes, clearly an important aspect of Jewish life.
It never ends. All right. I have a bunch of questions. Again, please post your questions. I'm getting them on the chat board, and on the Q&A board, and getting them messaged to me. I want to go back to your life as a commodity trader, because in addition to creating the exchange, you have to understand this about Leo. If the market's open, you only get, he has enough bandwidth to give you 100% attention in a conversation, and also have 33% on the screen that is right in front of him. And in the middle of a conversation, say, sell 30 cars of that. It's just the way, everybody knows that about Leo. Betty, you're long, how many years have you and Betty been married?
Well, trading is in your blood, and once it ends there, it becomes part of your DNA.
Yeah.
I really can't live without.
So Betty's never had a dinner party without Leo making a trade, because once he created trading around the clock, Leo trades around the clock. Okay, so a couple of, hold on one second. Someone asked, does it not take a huge risk mentality to forecast currency movements? What a great question. I once went around the trading floor. This is true when I was a young TV person, asking people, remember the days when remember Linda Goodman's sun signs? If you're old enough to remember, when you thought everybody's character was determined by their astrological sign. I did a whole story running around asking the best traders what month they were born to see if there was any connection. What is the mentality that allows you to take risk, Leo? Someone wants to know.
Well, frankly, I recognize the risks throughout my escape from Bialystok. Clearly, what my parents were doing was risk-taking in trying to escape and save their lives and that of their child. So that risk was part of my life for the first 10 years of my life. That's about all I really knew, is the risk involved. And I guess that transcends into adulthood, because I learned what the futures markets intend to give you is a way to limit that risk. And by understanding that, of course, I expanded my own beliefs about the markets and the ability not to foresee, but to understand that risk is part of business life. You can't be without it, but the futures market provide a mechanism to insure and hedge some of that risk. And that's hugely important in business life. So
that's a good point. Okay.
It was like next to nature for me.
Okay. Someone wants to go back to earlier in your story. Perhaps I missed it, but what year were you able to leave Poland? And how interesting that and I thought this when you were telling the story, got to go to Japan, because you came to the US in 41. That was obviously Pearl Harbor later that year. But Japan then became our enemy. So how did that fit?
Well, it was difficult for me to understand, because Japan was extremely helpful to the immigrants, and there were about 10,000 that came to their world, and penniless mostly, and they opened their arms and were extremely nice. So later, when they attacked the United States, of course, I was an American and patriotic to the hilt as I became a true American. But this was very difficult for me to understand. It wasn't until much later that I understood the difference between government and its people, because clearly Japan had attacked us on the basis of their government, whatever reasons they had. It was not the people that attacked us. And today, it's proven, as Japan is one of our strongest allies in the world, similarly in South Korea. And so, there is a difference between the feeling of the masses of people versus some dictator in the world that wants only his way, and it's not necessarily what the people want.
And we've also seen how a dictator or someone who thinks he is can whip up the masses into feeling that way. But it's interesting to note, was it just a year or two ago that the Emperor of Japan bestowed, tell that story. You got the highest honor in the country.
Yes, it's true. I was honored by the Emperor of Japan with the highest award they could give for the basis of creating markets in Japan, which I helped do, as well as popularizing the work of Sugihara and the fact that he was the Japanese Schindler and saved probably around 8,000 lives or so. Clearly, those two effects took the emperor took notice of them, and I was honored to receive that award. Is it true?
Yes, okay. Here's someone. This is an interesting question. What a great audience out there. I love the wording of your questions. Not to be disrespectful, says this questioner, but given the speed and a global scope of trading, specifically the rise of automatic computer trading with algorithms and so forth, do you feel that perhaps you opened a Pandora's box? They go on to say speculative trading has been made much easier with the goal of maximizing private profits. Oh, this is going to be interesting. I can't wait for you to bat this one out of the park. Well, trading no longer serves the original role of futures to help mitigate against uncertainty in the capital markets. So did you create a Pandora's box, and would you change it now? That's part of the question.
Quite the contrary. The markets have grown exactly as they have because of the fact that technology allowed us to use the best of technology to create new ways of trading, whether they are through artificial intelligence or through quantum mechanics or a variety of ways. There is no way to stop technology from continuing to lead us. And those who forget that are sure to be made history pretty soon. And you can use very many companies that forgot about that and are no longer in existence. On the contrary, the technology that is used today is leading the world to a better place every time. Sure, there are problems with it, like in all other things, and those have to be attended to. I'm not saying that it's utopia by any stretch of the imagination. It is not. But to say that it's a Pandora's box is incorrect, because it isn't that. It is a roadway to future. We don't even know where it can lead, but it has led us to very big markets. So that proof of the pudding is that the people that traded and create a great deal of activity are very important, because what they do is create liquidity. Without liquidity, you don't have markets. So the buys and sells that seemingly are of no consequence are really of great consequence, because they create a platform for the business community to hedge their risk. And that continues to grow, and that continues to grow everywhere. The proof of the pudding is that there are future markets now in every minor or major land country in the world, including China, of course. And I helped create some of those, and I helped create those in Singapore and in South Korea and in Great Britain and France and Brazil. All these nations wouldn't be doing that if they didn't produce better capital markets and stronger economics for them. So no, I really truly believe that we are very, very fortunate to have the kind of technology that we have in the United States, because that's our strongest arm.
Did I predict he would hit that one out of the park? There was another little piece to this question. I'll give you another shot at bat here. There's an implication here that speculative trading that speculation is a dirty word. I'm putting that implication on this question, but so I just thought I'll toss you a lob on speculation. Is that a bad thing, Leo?
Well, I just indicated speculation is what gives it liquidity. You know, often the business community has to go in one direction. They have to sell or they have to buy. Who's the other side? The other side is a speculator. There would be no markets if there was no speculators. And speculators is not a dirty word. It's not anything but good, because you need that in the markets to keep them liquid and to keep them strong. Without it, you don't have the markets and you have nothing. So I was one of those speculators. I still am. But I know the function that I provide, when multiplied by the millions, means that the markets are strong and are useful for business throughout the world.
Okay, in case anybody wondered, I knew that I would send that up. We have time for a couple more. I'm going to be interested to see how you answer this one, Leo, because we haven't spent much time talking about it. What do you think of cryptocurrency?
That's a very difficult question, and I'm not all sure about the answer, because I'd like to see it for a little longer and see how it works. It might be okay, and it might not be, but I think it has to be regulated. And so I'm very much in favor of regulation, so that we understand what it is that we are trading when we're trading it. The futures markets are very regulated, and they work quite well. I give credit to the CFTC, which is the regulator for futures, and the NFA, which is National Futures Association, that I helped create. So I'm really very strong on regulation, and I believe that the crypto, before it can be fully understood and accepted, will need strong regulation by the regulators, whether it's the SEC or the CFTC or the banks themselves. But the jury's out, and I'd rather wait and see.
Good answer. The blockchain technology behind it, however, there's no doubt that it will transform everything, just like electronification transformed the
Exactly
futures
right.
markets.
Such blockchain technology has speeded things up. It is a terrific idea, terrific technology. It brings me back to what I said earlier, that technology is our strongest forte, and we must continue to invite continued growth and continued use of technological systems and capabilities. The United States grew to the size and success it is because of the freedom to think. And yeah, that's part of capitalism. The freedom to think is an American ideal. And that when you have the freedom to think, you think of ideas. And one of the ideas is advancing technology. So I would never be against that.
Okay, let's talk about, we've been going into the futures. Let's go back to your past. 3 quick questions. Was your original name Melandovich? What was your father's name when he came here? Someone
the
thought
name
they knew.
Correctly was Melandovich, which had the Polish ending. But my parents, when we became citizens, thought that Melamed, which is the origin of the word Melamed, meaning teacher, and it's exactly what they were. So they adopted in their citizenship the name Melamed. I balked at that because I was born Melandovich until I graduated law school and decided I could get more clients with a shorter name. And I too joined my parents with the name of Melamed. And of course.
Okay, one more. From the son of a Bundist to a Bundist, how much of your father's socialist beliefs do you have empathy with? I noticed that sort of a contradiction. You mentioned your father was a socialist Bundist, and you, of course, are the king of capitalism.
Yes, it's a good question, but I am a capitalist because I believe deeply in the capitalism in the American world is a way of life. It is a way to think. It is freedom to build and to take chances, to take risks. And then if you fail in the American system of capitalism, you can have another chance and another chance. In some other systems, if you fail at something, you're discarded. Not in the United States. And therefore, I have embraced capitalism, but with certain caveats. I do believe that the corporate world has to be conscientious that it is a citizen of the country too. And as a citizen, it should maintain its efforts to make life better for the workers and the social standing and so forth and so on. I think that it's a natural thing, but that doesn't mean I would argue against capitalism at all. It is the best system in the world. It's the only one that gives you freedom to think and to invent and it's our hope against China and everybody else, because it makes us aware of competition, and competition is good. By the way, there is competition even in the Holocaust, because there's the Illinois Holocaust Memorial Museum. There's a great institution here in Chicago, or in Skokie, actually, and it competes in a very fine form with the one in Washington, D.C. And this museums such as that have sprung out all over the world, including Berlin, of course, as you know. So that's part of competition, believe it or not, and it's a good thing.
So on that note, capitalism, competition, the ability to think freely and to compete, and yet to remember your roots and remember your heritage and look forward to spreading it in the world. The book by Leo Melamed is called Man of the Futures. All of these stories are in there, and it's a wonderful read. I mean, it's just a great read. And Leo, you're a wonderful guy. Thanks to YIVO for sponsoring this event. The book is available. There's a link at the YIVO website or on Amazon, but go to YIVO and then you'll see the link and it's on your screen. Thank you, and I'm going to turn this back over now to Jonathan. Leo, a round of applause, everybody, even though you can't hear it, because Leo, as always, you're just the man of the futures. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Terry and Leo. It's a fascinating conversation, really riveting in so many different ways. And thank you again to everyone who's joined us. I noticed someone from Sao Paulo, Brazil, people from Cape Town and all over the world came to hear this. And I hope you all will get a copy of Leo's book and come and visit the YIVO Institute in New York City.
Let me just say that Jonathan does a terrific job together with Ruth Levin, that is so important to maintain the YIVO that preserves the memory of 1,000 years of Jewish life. And we've got to preserve the past if we want the future. Someone very smart said that once, and it's so very true. So I congratulate you, Jonathan, for doing a great job with the YIVO.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Leo. Thank you for your support. It was a great pleasure listening to both of you today. Bye-bye.